After a drug dealer seemingly comes back to life, he joins forces with a pimp and a prostitute to investigate the strange goings-ons of their small town. This one is as much a comedy as it is science fiction, so let's take a look at They Cloned Tyrone. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
I come in peace.
This is a science fiction movie podcast. We get together and talk about a sci-fi movie. It really is that simple. And on this week's show, we're doing a winner of a Patreon vote. 3 recent 2020s era movies were up for vote. And the winner was a Netflix film called They Cloned Tyrone. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I went into this knowing very little.
Same.
Obviously, the title gives you something away. There's going to be clones of some gentleman named Tyrone, apparently. Although, for a lot of the movie, I'm like, who is Tyrone? Who? No one said the name Tyrone. So that's something we'll get into. But of course, we will start spoiler-free, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we get into the spoilers. And if you are enjoying the show, please do hit the like button on YouTube. It helps us out a bunch if you do. And you can support us and get bonus shows over in Patreon, but I'll tell you more about that at the end of the show. So, we'll get into this. The basic premise of this, I feel... This is one where I'm not sure how much to reveal here, because I'm not sure how much is considered spoiler. But I guess the thing I'd compare it to more than anything else, bizarrely, is I would say that if you like something like They Live... Okay. It's got kind of vibes of that, in that it's about characters where something weird's going on, some sort of mysterious cover-ups happening, and
conspiracy.
Yeah, and the main characters start to try and investigate what's happening in their town, and that's kind of it. And it all kind of kicks off because the main character seemingly dies, and then he's there. How is he here? What's going on? And it kind of snowballs from there. So that is the basic gist of it. That's all I'll say plot-wise for now. So, yes.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's the plot, quote-unquote, does kick off very early on. I was surprised with how quickly it really got into, okay, not only is it showing us, the inciting incident, but also telling us things, like actually revealing parts of the mystery to us. And that's only because the mystery in this movie is so huge in its own right that even when they give us these tiny little things at the beginning and you feel like, oh, we're learning everything, there's so much more after that.
Yeah. So we got, a couple big names here. John Boyega is the lead role, and Jamie Foxx is the main supporting. And then completing our trio of main characters, we have Yo-Yo, played by Teyonah Parris, who I don't think I know from anything else, but I'll click on her and see if I have seen her in anything else. She was in the original Dear White People movie. I don't know if she was in the TV show though, because I saw that.
She's also Monica Rambeau in The Marvels, who I think you might have ducked out at that point, but
I didn't see Well, no, I'd have seen her in, was it WandaVision? She had a small role. Yeah, she had a supporting role in that. So yeah. So I would have seen her in at least that. Yep. So she's kind of the third. It's a trio of main characters. More as much as I said. One is the main character, it's still really a trio overall.
There's a conversation very early on where a young boy is talking about SpongeBob, and he compares John Boyega to Squidward because he's just so grumpy all the time. But that really describes this trio as a whole, where he is the straight man and the other two are just the wackiest sidekicks you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is the second genre listed for this typically is comedy. It's a sci-fi comedy. And I can't really argue with that because the side characters were hitting me with a lot of jokes and doing a lot of... Like, Jamie Foxx is really kind of doing he's like a hyperactive pimp in this movie. And lots of his little reactions to things are quite funny. So, fair enough.
No, I think the comedy in this is top tier stuff because it knows when to take a second and let the drama play out. But for the most part, anytime they need a laugh, anytime they need a comedic beat, it pretty much always lands. I don't think there was a single moment in this where I was cringing from the humor. It's always a funny movie.
Yeah. Well, and that leads in nicely to give the first general thoughts then. David, what did you think of They Cloned Tyrone?
It took me a minute. I think when I first started this movie, I was a little bit like, okay, I'm not sure if I'm going to be enjoying this that much through, because again, it takes a second for the inciting incident to happen. But past that point, this movie is so clever. Like, it's a mix of just actual smart sci-fi that it's playing around with. Like you said, it's got a they live sort of conspiracy thing going on, but also I think marking comedy as the second is underselling just how much of a fun time this movie is. Like, yes, it does have some serious dramatic moments to it, but I think that comedy is pretty much the top category it falls into. It's a funny movie. There's a lot of great moments in it. And it's not just funny in, like, you know, slapstick humor or like, oh, the characters are funny or whatnot. This is picking apart a bunch of like race humor, a bunch of like societal stuff that it's absolutely intelligent with the way it talks about it, and it makes it something to think about while also being as funny as it is. So I honestly really enjoyed this one. And that was a shock to me, because with a title like They Cloned Tyrone, I was kind of just expecting it to be Netflix quote unquote content and not actually like a good film.
Yeah, I think honestly seeing the Netflix logo like lowers my expectations significantly for just about any movie. I mean, hell, the last Netflix movie we did was what? Cloud Atlas?
Sounds right. I don't like that, but sounds right. No, not it wasn't Cloud Atlas. It was just Atlas. Cloud Atlas is the one.
Oh,
with,
sorry, you're right. That's the Wachowski's
Tom Hanks
movie.
Yeah,
yeah. Either that or maybe the second Rebel Moon. That may have been it depends which one of them came last.
I don't consider having watched that as much as endured that.
Yeah. No, I was somewhat surprised with how much I was getting into this. Once it gets going, I think for me it has kind of that Star Wars thing where the start's a little bit slow, but once the trio of characters are together and like they're kind of staying together because they're the ones that are going to be together for the rest of the movie pretty much. Once they were like having to like work together and interact constantly, that's where it really started to gel, and I was enjoying the chemistry, I was enjoying the lines and the jokes. The mystery was you know, it was solid, it was fun, it was compelling. I think it does have obviously some subtext, and it's clearly speaking about certain things. If I have a critique, if I have sort of, not even a critique, is I think this movie was really solid, right? And I was really into it. And I think as I was watching it, I had the sort of feeling that depending on the ending here, depending on how this wraps up, it's either going to be just a really solid movie that I'm, you know, that was a good time, that was funny, or it may actually elevate to something special, depending on what the ending does. Right. And between the two, I don't think it got to the special status. I think the ending just falls a little bit short of making it feel like, oh, they really nailed something that completely, you know, hit all the way through. I think because there were some moments towards the end, without spoiling anything, where I thought, okay, here's the heart of what the third act is. Here's where I'm going to feel like happy where all the characters are and the decisions they're making and rallying for something and all that stuff. And it's kind of there. They kind of hint at it. But the last like 15, 20 minutes kind of goes into more just generic territory. And I think it's the weakest part of the whole movie for me. And I think it stops it from being great. It's like, it's good. Like, the movie is got good characters. It's funny. It's doing a lot of smart things. But then the ending just falls a little bit short of really like tying it off in the bow that makes me go, oh, that's an instant modern classic.
Yeah, I can see where you're going with that. There's a comparison I really want to make, but I can't without spoiling everything. So once we get into spoilers, I'll do it. But I think that I agree with the most part. I don't think that the ending really falters. I don't think it's like, you know, it's not a build up and then there's just a complete lack of payoff or anything.
It's just fine.
It's everything that you could expect from the ending, but it's not just delivering that one big punch to you and be like, this is it. This is the big thing for me. A lot of what I would compare this to in terms of modern movies is actually a little bit of like Get Out. Not in everything that it's going with specifically, but I think that there is this underlying narrative that it's exploring that's very similar. And I think that Get Out probably had just a little bit stronger of and honestly an entire package, but an ending specifically as well.
Yeah. Because it's not to discredit because the ending, like I say, it's completely fine. It just, I think the movie kept surprising me throughout with where it was going. It kept adding new elements, and I didn't really feel at the ending, like it kind of does try to add a new element, but the extra element it adds, I thought was a bit, okay, you've kind of taken this maybe a step beyond where I'm enjoying. And I think what I would have preferred in the third act was to surprise me with how much I care about the characters succeeding. I think that's what I wanted to feel at the ending, was to really root for the characters and really be satisfied with what they were trying to do and what they were trying to pull off. So
yeah, I think it also made, you compared it to Star Wars earlier, I think it made the Star Wars era as well, where in the third act it split up our hero from the supporting cast, and I think it really needed to keep them all together to make it solidly land there.
Yeah. There's some more specific things I could say, but I need to wait until we're and the spoilers. So yeah, but that said though, despite that one kind of drawback, I found this pretty entertaining throughout. I mean, once it gets going, once it's actually started off the mystery, which is basically once the main character actually dies at the start, right? Which is, maybe 15 minutes in. Once that hits, that's where it starts to get interesting. I do think there's like, I won't even call it a mid-credit scene. The title appears at the end, and then there's a sequence.
Yeah.
I think that sequence I could have done without, as much as, like, I know what, like, you can't spoil anything, but I understand why you would say it needs to be there, but it felt kind of superfluous to me, other than the one obvious thing that it does by the end of it.
Yeah, it's I like it because this entire movie, I don't want to call it a bottle movie, but it is all localized into just one neighborhood specifically. And they specifically point out that it's only just this neighborhood. I like that it hints at a larger conspiracy going on, because that's the point of the whole movie, is exploring this conspiracy. It hints at this larger even than this neighborhood going on, but it does feel like at that point it's just, you've already kind of not hit the ending. This extra bit on top of it is just taking away more than it's giving.
Yeah. Especially since it just felt a little bit repetitious with, like, because that part of me was thinking, oh, you're going to reveal something really, like, jaw-dropping here. And then, no, it was more of just like a, if you want a moment where a joke falls flat, it's probably that credit sequence. Because it kind of ends with a comedy beat, and I was like, I didn't really need... I
didn't see it as much of a comedy beat, but I do see, there's supposed to be some humor in that.
Yeah. It's tonally, it's more towards comedy than like a serious bombshell of something. So there is that. There is another big cast member that I'm leaving out here because I feel like it's a spoiler, because it was as a surprise when they show up. So I'm going to. I'm not going to tell you. I mean, if you look at the cast on IMDb or whatever, you'll see who it is. But in case you want to go in cold and you don't want to know who the surprise is, I will not tell you.
I would fully suggest you're allowed to check the IMDb list if you really want to. It doesn't spoil much. Do not check the Wikipedia article, because they reveal quite a bit. Even if you're not reading the synopsis, just the cast list, they reveal quite a bit of a few of the later twists.
Interesting. So yeah, obviously the cast is very good. The three leads are pretty great.
I would say even the supporting cast, specifically J. Alphonse Nicholson. He's just like a rival gang leader sort of character. He barely has a role in this movie, but what he gets on screen, he sells it. Like, it really works for me.
Yeah, so I just to establish who the main leads are playing here. John Boyega is Fontaine. And he is... At first, I thought he was like some guy who hates gangs and like drug dealers, because the opening kind of makes you think
he's the guy cleaning up the neighborhood.
Yeah, but no, he's actually just taking out a rival drug dealer. He is also a drug dealer. And we have Jamie Foxx, who is a pimp. Who's Slick Charles, who's always wearing the most ludicrous coats. It's really a sight to behold.
Pete, he was the 1996 Pimp's Ball Pimp of the Year.
Who's giving that award out exactly? Like, where's this publicized?
The Pimp's Ball, of course. Sorry, the Player's Ball. That's what.
I'm going to be honest. I thought this was a period piece until someone started bringing up cryptocurrency, and I went, "Wait, what? This isn't 1992."
Okay, this just interrupting the cast list for a second. This stylistic choice is 100% blaxploitation film. Like, everything about it, from the soundtrack to like the visuals to the way they play off everything, it is 100% calling back to all the blaxploitation films. And because of the content of it and because of where they go with it, it works so well.
Oh yeah, no, I love that it has a visual style. I love that they went for a tone. The varied in like fake print damage occasionally. You know, you see splotches every so often. It's you know, there's a stylistic choice that's been made, which I really appreciate. But it was so convincing that, and I didn't I'm sure there's probably like before the cryptocurrency mention. I'm sure someone's got a mobile phone at some point before then, because they definitely have them for a lot of the movie. But
the one guy who gets jumped by Fontaine, he pulls a cell phone out of his pocket.
But the vibe of the movie is so convincingly retro feeling that when she brought up cryptocurrency and blockchains, I went, what? Say that again?
Hold on a minute. And I think it really hits in that scene is because all of the other stuff surrounding it it's kind of timeless. Like, it all just kind of works wherever. It's only in that scene because we're looking at Jamie Foxx wearing the most ludicrous 70s suit possibly imaginable. And to have it juxtaposed with blockchain is like, wait, something's not right here. Something's clicking in my brain.
Yeah, and which actually fits for one of the themes of the movie. I can't say what it is yet, but for one of the themes of the movie, there's something I can say here that actually makes this all click together in a way that makes sense. And even a lot of the TVs that they have are all, you know, CRTs and stuff like that, so they feel ancient. There's just there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah. Well, it's a very poor neighborhood to begin with. So like this is absolutely the hood. Nobody's got exuberance and extravagance going on.
I feel like the hood now these days still have moved on to at least early flat screen TVs.
Oh, yeah. Probably.
This is definitely still a stylistic choice. So you got Jamie Foxx. He is very funny in this movie. I presume this was something he filmed before his medical issues, because it was a stroke he had?
I can't recall. I didn't even know this was happening.
Oh yeah, he just woke up from a coma like a few months ago or something. Yeah, he was in a coma for a while.
I mean, this was 2023, so yeah, I'd assume that it's been done for a while.
Yeah, probably shot this in 2022, maybe early 2023, depending on when it came out. But yeah, so you know, the thought did pop into my head is that this must have been just before he had all these medical issues. So
yeah.
And Yo-Yo is one of his, pardon the word, hoes. But they say that a lot in this movie.
Yep. It's a noun, it's an adjective, it's a verb. Use it however you see fit.
My favorite line involving that might have been, "You can go on your merry hoeing way," I believe was a sentence at one point.
I like how he says that. She does what he asks, and then he like continues driving, and she's like, "You said I could go on my merry hoeing way."
So yeah, and she also adds a lot to the movie, because while I mean she is funny, maybe doesn't have quite as many like lines that are funny as much as Jamie Foxx does, but she has a lot of things about her and her character. She's arguably the one that's the most fleshed out in terms of like they really thought about her personality and the fact that she has all these interests that have nothing to do with her life as a hooker.
Yeah, it's 100% that stereotype of like, I'm a stripper to pay my way through college. She is like, I had all of these childhood dreams of being like an investigative journalist and like treasure hunting and stuff like that, but things didn't work out the way I wanted to, so now I'm a prostitute.
Yeah. So yes, so that's just your three leads. They have a lot of chemistry. And because the movie starts in a place where Jamie Foxx is scared of Fontaine because he owes him money, and like those initial meetings are so combative, and even between Yo-Yo and Slick Charles, like Yo-Yo is like, "I'm retired, I'm done with you, I want to leave." They all start off in a place where they're so against each other that when they're forced to work together, that's the beauty of the chemistry, is that it's like, okay, we start to have to like rely on each other. And that even happens with some more rivalries by the time the movie ends, where some of us have to actually get over our shit and work together because there's an outside threat of some kind.
Right. And I mean, honestly, that's kind of a theme of the movie by the time you hit the end of it, is like, you know, this outside force is trying to take hold of the neighborhood. Pretty blatantly just a metaphor for gentrification in a lot of ways. And then the hood itself has to stand up against it.
Yeah. So, all that stuff's solid. Director, Juel Taylor, this is basically his only feature-length movie. He did another one in 2017 called Actors Anonymous, but otherwise it's been TV episodes and shorts. But it does have a lot more credits as a writer. He was a writer on Creed 2, Space Jam: A New Legacy, unfortunately. So I mean, probably wasn't just that. I bet that's got like 8 writers. Let me click on it.
I think it has the studio as the writer.
He just came in and filled in some synonyms or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh
my God, Jesus Christ! What?
Hold on. I was going to say it has 3, but then I realized, oh no, it's only showing me the first 3. I had to click on see more.
Yeah, 4 people based on Space Jam, 4 other people story by, and then 6 people screenplay by.
Look, I'll let them away with the 4 based on Space Jam. Because they have to give those credits out regardless. That has nothing to do with the script for this movie.
Right.
But 4 story by credits, 6 screenplay credits. Now,
although the 4 story by carry over into screenplay,
yes.
so it's 6 separate people.
6 is still a lot for one script.
It is.
That's a lot of people on one script.
Too many. And to be fair, what I remember about that movie, it shows.
Yes. And I can't believe that not a single writer from the original classic Space Jam was brought back to work on the follow-up.
Peter, we used to have morals. We used to have an ethical backbone that wasn't just sold out by money.
Before the metaverse.
To be fair, credit to Juel Taylor. He's able to do possibly the most sellout move I've ever seen in my life, and then come back and do this sort of movie. Like, at least he didn't stick to that, you know?
I mean, it's entirely possible that having his name attached to a big production like that is partly what helps him get greenlit for making something like this.
Yeah, he shows he's able to play in the studio system.
Yeah, so, you know, it means to an end, right? This was him being a hoe in Space Jam: New Legacy so that he could do what he actually wanted with They Cloned Tyrone.
Yes. Also, apparently, his co-writer for They Cloned Tyrone was Tony Rettenmeyer, who also did Space Jam: A New Legacy.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
So, 2 refugees from Space Jam 2 making their own movies. Nice to see. Oh, good.
By the way, the Wikipedia article for this movie does say that filming wrapped in April of 2021. So they were shopping it around for a while there.
Well, I will say just an asterisk on that is that it might be less shopping it around and more the pandemic is happening and movies aren't being released in quite the same way as they were usually. So, yeah. So I'm not surprised it took a couple of years to go out. Not obviously, not that it mattered to go out on Netflix, but clearly, like, Netflix is just who ended up, you know, buying the distribution rights. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much it until we get into spoilers. Then, unless there's anything else you want to bring up.
The only other thing, and it's always the thing we mention right before spoilers, is soundtrack score. But I'm going to focus more on soundtrack here. Is that it is a bumping soundtrack. Like, if you have any interest in like a 70s funk sort of vibe, look up the soundtrack to this movie because it is fantastic.
I recognize a single song, which probably doesn't surprise you.
Pete, I have never met a whiter man than you, so...
Amusingly, the few moments that there is a little bit of score, there's a little bit of synth in there, and I was kind of digging that. And I think, but part of the reason why I was digging it is not just because I like synth, and I think it goes well with sci-fi, but it was contrasting all of the song choices significantly, so it kind of had a bit more impact because of that. So
absolutely,
that's a nice thing. So yeah, we'll say spoilers for They Cloned Tyrone. You have been warned because I feel like they're going to start flying very thick and very fast once we get into this.
Okay. So Cabin in the Woods, right? Like, you tell me you saw that.
Okay, I didn't think of it, but now that you've said it, I can see why your mind would go there. I still think They Live's a more apt comparison.
In terms of theming and stuff like that, but just in terms of, like, if you had to boil this plot down to its bare essentials, I think the closest contraption would be Cabin in the Woods.
I don't think it's the closest, but I don't disagree that I can see why you're thinking. The huge underground lab, like them all working to make all this keep going. I get the comparison.
Okay, all right.
I get the comparison. I think They Live with, like, you know, a dose of Get Out and I don't know, like, but those are the main things that makes me think of.
Apparently, also on the Wikipedia page, the director has credited They Live, Groundhog Day, It Follows, and Napoleon Dynamite as influences.
Okay, I want to pick those apart a little bit. So, They Live, obviously, I've said it like 5 times already, so clearly I'm on the same page. Groundhog Day, I get, because honestly, when the clone wakes up, I thought, are we doing a time loop movie? This feels like he's just waking up at the start of the same day.
He's got a routine, and it feels like he's doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, but here's the thing. He does think it's that same day. But this clone doesn't know that last day happened. So in a weird way, he is kind of looping, but only for him. Everyone else had that day and has moved on, but he's just, going about his business.
Yeah.
So, right, so you've got that. I can see that comparison. What was the third one?
It Follows.
It Follows. That's an interesting one. That's good taste. He's got good taste. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's kind of coming down to the idea of like, you can't escape the surveillance. Like, it's constantly there no matter what you're doing. That's kind of where I could see that coming from.
I can see that. Napoleon Dynamite, I can't really comment on because I have seen it, but it was once and it was like 20 years ago.
Yeah, the only thing I could think Napoleon Dynamite is just I wouldn't even call it absurdist, but just the more surreal humor aspect of it. The idea of like, we're not just going to do joke payoff,
I'll be honest.
It's going to be more of a humor like tone throughout.
I am shocked that in that list of inspirations, he did not quote Hollow Man.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because they bring that movie up like 3 times in this. And funny enough, that movie did have an underground lab. So when they went down to the lab, I did immediately think of Hollow Man because they'd already mentioned it to me.
Maybe he didn't bring it up because elsewhere in their interview where he mentioned this, they already said, so Hollow Man, right?
Which, to be honest, it was probably one of my favorite little weird laughs of the movie. Is they're sitting in the car, the 3 main characters, relatively early. I know things have started to happen, but it's relatively early still. And Yo-Yo is saying, "Oh, it's some shit. Maybe they've got like a lab, like it's like a Hollow Man or something." And immediately Jamie Foxx just starts going, "Yeah, that was a good movie. That was a good movie." And then Yo-Yo's like, "Yeah, I picked that one. I picked that." And it was just their enthusiasm, and it just I'm just now picturing like this pimp Slick Charles and Yo-Yo. And him coming over her one night and saying, "Hey, let's watch a movie. What do you feel like?" And her being like, "I want to watch this Hollow Man."
Yeah.
And just them watching Hollow Man and getting into it. It's just there's just a visual here that I'm enchanted by.
It's like you said, especially with her, but also to some extent, like Charles, they did a great job of fleshing out the character. And that's not just through us learning her likes and dislikes in terms of like what she wanted to be, but also through moments like that of she really enjoys movies and she's just able to like quote out these weird Kevin Bacon flicks that she's watched.
Yeah, because I think when because they're talking about labs or they're talking maybe about like there's something unseen or he says something that sounds like a quote from Hollow Man. I think that's what she actually gets her to bring up the movie. But yeah, like, and when we see her like her bedroom at her grandmother's house where they go to hide there at one point, and there's just like a shot of like every Nancy Drew book, like a complete set, and Jamie Foxx is just like, how many adventures does this bitch go on? And it's just little things that I'm like, damn, they're really fleshing her out and giving her all these little ticks and things like. I think because it really goes against like the idea of typically when you think of a prostitute in a movie and how they're portrayed, they're very one-dimensional, they're there to serve that purpose and nothing else. And it's kind of like almost really conflicting in a weird way to say, oh no, they're really into this book series and they really like this movie and this is what they actually want to do, this is what their desires actually are. They stand for something. She has ideals, she has morals, she thinks ethically what's going on here is wrong. If anything, she's the one out of the 3 of them that's, once things get going, she's the one that's like, hey, we have to do something about this. This is affecting the whole town. Like, she's kind of the hero of the 3 of them, at least early on. So
yeah, absolutely. I think later on, as they establish like who is a clone, who isn't a clone, it's obvious she isn't, and they explicitly say like, yeah, everyone else here is important enough that they have clones set up, but you're just a hoe. Like, we don't.
Yep.
We're not going to do that for you, and so it's giving her, like you said, this idea that she is so one-dimensional in any other movie, but here they give her that depth and show, no, that's not just what she is. She's something bigger than that. Yeah,
and it's not a first time. Like, I remember watching The Deuce and Maggie Gyllenhaal was a main character who played a prostitute, and you got into her life and why she's doing this and so on and so on. But it was refreshing here because it's this ensemble piece, and it's just kind of like, again, compare it to Star Wars. And by the way, this comparison to Star Wars has got nothing to do with John Boyega. It's because it's 3 characters who are entertained together and they go on kind of an adventure. But like, if she's the Leia of this trio, that's kind of wild.
Yeah.
Which means Jamie Foxx is the Han Solo and Boyega is the Skywalker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's the Star Wars ensemble I want to see. They were much more entertaining than whatever was in the third or the Disney trilogy.
For sure. Just change the title a little bit. They mind tricked Tyrone. There you go.
Yeah, there you
That's
go.
your movie. But yeah, actually, one of my favorite little laughs with the yo-yo, just to get this out of the way. I mean, we'll get to the context of this later. But when it cuts to her in like a classic Private Eye like outfit with the hat and the sunglasses and like the tan like raincoat, because she's trying to like mail evidence to the Washington Post of what's going on, and I just laughing because I'm like, oh, you're trying to be Nancy Drew. You're actually trying to like you're doing the right thing, but you're doing it via the means of, because that was the other thing about the Nancy Drew book like collection, is that once they get into more of it and they start to, God, all the stuff going on here, it's like, okay, what would Nancy Drew do? And she starts like saying, okay, you look at the facts, what do we know? And they start listing it, and I'm like, we're basing the investigation of the potential secret underground lab that are, at this point in the movie, we know are at least cloning people, and we're starting off with, what would Nancy Drew do? Like, what would she do in this scenario? That's where we'll start from here.
I love the one comparison. There's a recurring line in like the first half where she's saying like, hey, look, like all of the Nancy Drew books follow a formula where like it seems like something crazy's going on, but then you dive down deep into it and it's like vanilla missionary basic stuff. Like it's absolutely nothing special. And then as they figure out what's going on here, she's freaking out. She's like, this isn't vanilla. This is some sex dungeon bukkake stuff going on here.
It's not often you hear the word bukkake in a movie, so little clap.
Yeah. If you could work it in and somehow it's not the weirdest thing going on in the scene, you've succeeded.
Well, she set up the metaphor earlier, so it didn't feel weird when she used it later on to expand the metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, and all this is just to say that like these characters were endearing to watch because, well, they're silly in some ways, right? Because I mean, like Slick Charles is a silly character. There's no getting around that. Of course he is. It was kind of why part of why he's so endearing is because he is so ludicrously silly with these big coats and the hair and the way he talks. He doesn't talk in the third person, but the way he kind of talks. Well, he talks in the third person, but not with his name. He talks in the third person with the word pimp, where he'll say things like, oh, like, a pimp's got to do this, or, oh, you can't do this to a pimp, or so on and so on. Like, he does a lot of that. But when they sort of stumble into doing the right thing, and maybe you're sort of going down a path where you realize, oh, these three might actually have to be the heroes that save the whole town, and that you kind of really want to root for them at a certain point. And I think that's really the heart of the movie. Oh
yeah, no. Once I think one of the better parts here is that you were saying at the beginning how they're at odds with each other, like they all have reasons to be fighting with each other. I like how there's never a moment in here where like they are fighting about whether or not they're going to keep doing this with each other. Like it's never a thing of, oh, you piss me off so much, maybe I'll just go my own way, I'll do this, whatever. It's always a thing of the neighborhood, whatever's going on is more important than whatever we've got going on between us. And so the bonding happens just naturally because we don't have to take the time to go on a separate little sidetrack of, oh, why are you so angry? It's like Charles. Like, what did he do? Like, no, we've seen that. We've got that. And we get it through backstory as well. It's 100% focused on what's happening here, and the characterization comes as a consequence of that.
I hadn't really thought about it, but you're right. There's a lot of like little micro conflict between them. And, because, like, things like, oh, go in there, you're being scared, or like just the context constantly gives them reasons to be at odds, where Slick Charles is being the scaredy cat and doesn't want to get in the elevator, but they both kind of stare at him and he kind of has to give in and go in, and like there's little things like that. But you're right, there's never a point where the question comes up about like, oh, why are we doing this together, or I hate your guts. They never, like, you can tell that there's a lot of animosity that's been there from before that kind of fades away over the movie, but they never talk about the fact that they've got I'm on it. We just see it. It's this classic show and don't tell, because we can just see how they're acting to each other rather than having to spell it out for the audience at every goddamn turn.
Right, absolutely.
So yeah, that's a really good point. So okay, what
you want to try? You want to try it?
Okay, so obviously the mystery starts with, right, John Boyega, his character Fontaine, runs over a drug dealer, and the boss of that drug dealer, who is the guy you mentioned earlier, Isaac, that character, he is obviously upset about this. His drug dealer has been run over with a car. So, all character setup stuff, I will come back and talk about any of that that's relevant. But he finds Fontaine, and a scene which I thought was very well shot, might I add, where
so good.
Fontaine's sitting in the car and he realizes the car that's sort of blocking his exit from the car park is probably malicious, that this is not just like a random, idiot who's like in the wrong place. This is something dangerous. And he starts to like reach for his gun. He sort of psychs himself up. There's not a word spoken. But then as soon as he gets out the door, there's just gunshots and he goes down and sort of crawls back into the car. And
the camera stays trained from the passenger seat, looking out the driver's side the entire time, from psych up to all this happening. And you see like the back of his coat blow out with bullet holes as he gets shot, and then has to like fall back in the car just trying to stay alive.
Yeah, the camera just stays on Boyega the whole time, pretty much for the entire sequence. And it just means that his acting, I mean, yeah, there's some gunshots and maybe some squib effects happening, but it's pretty much all on Boyega to sell the entire scene. And I like when you do that, if the actor can pull it off, because it's really impressive. It's a nice little kind of, it's tense because you're just with him. You can't see anything that he can't see, really. You're just sort of like in that one spot. So that's really cool. But he dies. But then he wakes up the next morning. It's like Groundhog Day. He seems to be himself. He's doing all the same shit. He's lifting weights. He's going to the store to buy a scratch card, which we saw him do before, and he picks a different circle, and that also felt like a Groundhog Day thing. Like, fate meant he picked a different one, and like, I don't know, it kind of thing.
It's just like tiny little butterfly effect, where like something slightly different happened earlier in the day, and that meant that he picked a slightly different circle on the scratch off.
Although I thought that scratch cards, you were always meant to scratch them all off, but this movie presents this one where it seems like you're only meant to scratch one.
Yeah, I've seen ones like that before, but frankly, they seem rife for cheating. But as we find out later, all of the scratch-off circles say you lose anyway, so...
Yeah, but that seems normal to me, because I feel like that's the point, is that only one in, a million actually say you win something big, kind of thing. Anyway,
but that implies that you scratch them all off, and then that makes sense.
Obviously, the point, though, is when he realizes that later, it's like, oh, it's a losing game, it's rigged. Like, you're being kept down, which is kind of the whole point of the movie. But anyway, so they go investigating because he sees like a creepy car pull, what may even be him. Like, it looks like him in the distance who's stumbling with gunshots. Right?
I don't think it's him, but it's definitely somebody who's shot and has escaped from somewhere.
Yeah, but this car drives up next to him, pulls him in. He thinks that's weird, and he basically remembers, oh, that pimp owes me money. Right? He has a little moment where he realizes that. He goes out to see Slick Charles, and Slick Charles is freaked out because he, heard the gunshots, went outside and saw him dead. Like, he knows he's goner. So he thinks he's seen a ghost. So his reactions are funny. Everything that Boyega's saying, Slick Charles isn't acting scared in the way that he would normally act scared, because I owe him money and I'm worried that he's going to do something. Yeah. He's scared because you're dead. What is this? So it's all very genuine.
Yeah, I love how it compares of the scene where he initially confronts him and says, like, hey, you owe me money and stuff. You see him trying to slick talk his way out of it. You see him trying to, like, oh, yeah, you gave me some less than good stuff, so, like, I think we should call it even. And, and he's got a million excuses. But this second time around, there are no excuses. It's him just saying, you got shot. You're dead. Like, and you can see Boyega's just like, this... Are you trying to get out of paying me? Because I don't understand this game.
But because he's had these weird... Because, when he woke up, he sort of woke up clutching his chest, like almost like a fragment of that memory was still in there, and he just didn't quite process it. But it's like, hey, Yo-Yo stormed off right before you arrived last night. Let's go and ask her if she saw and heard anything. So that leads them to go finding Yo-Yo. And sure enough, she's like, yeah, I heard gunshots, and I came back, and I saw a car leave, and I saw... you and you were dead.
However, she says she saw the car leave, but she recognizes the car from one of her regulars, like it's just down the street. So she directs where to go, and as she points out the car, we know we know that the car that Isaac was in and the one that Slick Charles saw was, you know, like a little lowrider car. Like it wasn't a big like minivan or anything. This one's an SUV. It's a black SUV, and it's like that's not the car. But
they set up that he sort of like notices because she mentions, oh, it's one of those cars that the famous ball players like drive, and he's like, why do you say that? And that's what makes him connected to the one he saw, like grabbing the guy that was shot off the street earlier. So like, hey, let's go find that, and they track it to this house. They see the car there, and Boyega wants to go in. The others are a bit hesitant, but it's like, okay, we'll go in. And the house is weird because it's kind of mostly empty. There's nothing there except one room is like a break room from like a workplace, right? It's like it's got some lockers. It's got a table with playing cards. There's a little TV, a little fridge for snacks and drinks. And they're like, what is this? What's going on here? And then, of course, they find an elevator. And they're like, what's this? Boyega gets in. So does Yo-Yo. She wants to see what's going on. Slick Charles does not want to get in that elevator, but he eventually gets pressured into it.
I love the elevator ride down. Yo-Yo pulls. We already have Boyega, Fontaine. He has his gun out. Yo-Yo pulls out her gun. And then Slick Charles is just like, wait, why has he all got guns? What's going on? Like, what are we doing here? And it's just like, oh, we don't know what's going to be on the other side of that door. And then they start hearing music playing, and he's immediately like, okay, yeah, I'm strapped. Let's go.
I also love that both Slick Charles and Yo-Yo's guns are tiny. Like, she has this little, like, silver... It's just a semi-automatic pistol, but it's really small. And then he's got, like, this really tiny gold revolver that he's always got.
It's 100% like just a for-show pimp weapon. It feels like he's never had to fire that before.
Yeah. So yeah, they come out and there's this scientist doesn't see them, but he's dancing to the song that's playing. It's like
Michael Jackson too.
Yeah,
I can't remember specifically which song.
He's just, you know, and the fact that we later find out this guy's like an early experiment to like slowly transition black people into white people, and that's why he's kind of light skinned, but he's got a bit of an afro. I think the fact that he's listening to Michael Jackson, when the constant joke that everyone always uses with Michael Jackson is, when did he stop being black and when did he start being white? I think it's a very pointed choice they have made here that works.
Yeah, I do think that it was, if I remember correctly, it was a Michael Jackson song closer to the end of his life, not one of his early hits. So I'm sure there would be, like, if this guy were allowed to progress, a regression through Michael Jackson's years until he got back to, like, early Michael Jackson.
So yeah, I mean, like here, they find Boyega finds his own dead body and kind of freaked out by that. Meanwhile, the other stuff going on here, Slick Charles finds some white powder, and keep in mind this is like a chemistry lab they've walked into, right? Oh, yeah. He sees a little pile of white powder and he thinks, "Oh, is this the snow? Can I have some of this?" And he tastes some of it and goes, "Oh, that's not cocaine. But I think I'll take some anyway, because it feels like it's got a bit of a kick." And I'm like...
Pulls out a little bag, he just starts loading it up.
And I'm like, it's like, Charles, that could be anthrax. You don't know what that is. It could be anything.
Look, he's here for a good time, not a long time.
You're in a laboratory. There is not an indication that anything here is recreational. This could be serious shit.
We've got Fontaine holding the scientist at gunpoint, basically asking, like, what's going on. Both of them, of our you know, Yo-Yo and Slick Charles, have been told not to touch anything. He immediately is loading up on powder, and then when he has to take over hostage control on this scientist, we see Yo-Yo in the back with beakers just like mixing crap. It's like, all right.
Yeah, this might not end in acid or explosions, depending on what you're mixing. Like, who knows? Right?
I'm expecting it to explode in her hand, and that's what causes the next problem. But it turns out she just gets overwhelmed by it, like, bubbling up, drops a beaker, which then causes Slick Charles to shoot the guy because he was surprised.
Well, it's not just that, though, because he's acting kind of off before that, where he's starting to have these little random little, like, ticks, and he's sort of laughing a little bit.
He's
and
giggling,
he kind of, he has, like, a little tick. And yeah, the little jolt from her dropping the beaker makes him like fire the gun. And my favorite part of it though is that when he looks to goes like, "Hey player, you're okay, right? Player, you're fine. You're gonna be fine." And I'm like, he's dead, Slick. He's completely dead. So that got me. I got a good chuckle out of that.
And I just want to point out, this is a 2-hour-long movie.
Yes.
All of this is in the first 30 minutes. Like they move very quickly once things start get going.
Yeah, because obviously here we have like, okay, obviously he's been cloned, right? He is a clone of the one we saw before, which at this point you might just assume that was the original. Obviously, we learn later in the movie that's not the case, right? But they leave in a panic because they've just shot someone, alarm starts going off, they'll get out of Dodge, and the next day they're separated for a bit because Fontaine goes with his other buddies, like his drug dealing buddies, and busts into the house, but it's all suddenly a normal house with furniture and there's no elevator. It's been covered up, like they've completely cleansed it. So it's like, okay, fine, whoever this is, it's a big deal, it's all going on, right? But from there, the conspiracy, forms a bit and remolds and turns into something else. Because when they all get together again and they start talking about what this could possibly be, Yo-Yo wants to keep digging, Fontaine obviously wants to keep digging, and Slick is kind of hesitant, but the one thing he keeps saying is that he's hungry. He's like, hey, I can't be, a pimp needs my blood sugar's getting low here. Let's go get a pimp some food.
I throughout the entire movie up to this point, there's a bunch of like commercials and stuff on TV for this chicken place. And it's these stereotypical commercials where like, everyone's at this place, they're all laughing, having fun, it's a great time. And all I could think is like, yeah, okay, it's just it's a normal commercial. They get to this chicken place, and I swear to God, it's the McDonald's from Mac and Me. Like, everyone is genuinely having the best time of their lives as they're sitting here eating chicken.
Yeah, well, not at first, because it's like they sit down, they start eating chicken, because this is where a lot of the Nancy Drew conversation happens, where it's like, what do we do? Blah, 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 blah. Because I think they spent the night at her place. That's when we went back to her grandma's house, was when they left the lab the first time.
They needed to hide out, yeah.
So that's Nancy Drew, like, reveals already happened, that she's super into that. And they're starting to, like, here's the facts, here's this. But as they're going through the facts, they start giggling, including Fontaine. And Slick points out that in the years that he's known this asshole, he's never once seen him laugh. And then he thinks that's funny, but then he starts to look around and there's like fried chicken hanging out of his mouth in shock as he's doing this, where he notices that everyone in the restaurant's all laughing, and he's like, shit, it's that powder I took. And he realizes that he was giggling like this when he took that powder, and that it must be in the chicken. And this is where it sort of starts the ball rolling, and the rest of the conspiracy stuff is that they're putting stuff in the food, and then later we find out in hair products, in the music, all of it designed to control everyone.
Wine or the grape juice at the churches, like everything in this neighborhood, one way or another, has been laced with this. It is not even just the giggling product. They have, like, in the hair stuff, it's a submissive thing. It's like you stop worrying. Like everything has its own stuff going on. Because
the woman in the salon is like complaining that she's a teacher and her pay is getting cut, and she's having to spend her own money on certain supplies for the kids, and she's rightfully very angry. But then the woman starts like rubbing this stuff into her hair, and she's like, but maybe I'm out of line. Maybe I've just I'm too high tempered or whatever she says. She starts to calm down, and it's like oh they're just manipulating. Like everything's designed to have a different effect.
Yeah,
the music's got subliminal messages in it or whatever.
Yeah, later on when they go to the church, they see that everyone in the church is like singing, dancing, hollering, and like having a fantastic time. It's like the most spiritual experience you could imagine. And it's like, this seems extra even for a black church. Like, this is a lot going on here.
Yeah, so the progression here is that when they go to the salon, right, and they're investigating the products there, and they see some of this stuff happening, it's like Charles was investigating the van they followed that was delivering the products, because that's what they followed here. And he gets trapped. So there's like a great shot of him being trapped in the back of the van and like banging on the window and being driven away. And I'm like, oh, this is super fun. They're going to have to go find him now. He's like trapped in the van with all this stuff. They actually found him kind of easy, actually. Maybe a slight critique here is I was expecting more of a hunt to save him, maybe.
Yeah, more of a Nancy Drew routine.
Yeah.
It was actually something that I thought was going to be a lot bigger in the movie that ended up not being, was the reason that they find out where he is that there's this old guy who hangs outside the convenience store.
Frog, his name is.
Seemingly homeless, named Frog, that Boyega talks to, and he just spouts off nonsense constantly. But one of the things that he said was about like the hair products, saying straighter is greater, which is the motto on the hair product. So Boyega talks to him, be like, hey, what do you know? And he keeps on speaking in riddles, more or less, but seemingly he's not affected by this stuff, and he knows about it. He knows what's going on. And they never really come back to that as to why he's A, not affected, and B, knows so much.
I think it's kind of meant to come across as like a, he's just, because he's always like just drinking booze or whatever, that he's kind of immune to whatever's going on. And they just kind of leave him be because he's the crazy old man who just spouts nonsense. It just so happens that if you pay attention to him, he might be given some hints as to, what's going on. The straighter is greater thing as well is a very kind of racial, like, straight hair is better. That's what everyone should be aspiring to.
I mean, again, this is 100% like what is affected in this town. A fried chicken place,
that's a good point. Yeah.
Like, all of this stuff is just straight up racial profiling of how are we going to get everyone in this city affected.
So, so they find him at the van, and that's outside the church. And he finds a key card in the van, which then when they eventually find the key card scanner, because they're basically hiding the church till everyone leaves, and they look for it, it's on the front of the altar bit. They stick it in, it opens up another like elevator door, whatever. And it's when they go down here and there's like a sort of like ready room where people are putting on like sort of hazmat style suits. We're like, okay, we'll hide in these and we'll go and see what this place is all about. And we find out that this lab just basically is the size of the entire neighborhood. Underneath it, they've got little golf carts they're driving around in, and we get a montage of all the various things. They've got people down here who are prisoners that they're experimenting on with their music, with their hair products, with whatever, all this stuff.
This is something I didn't find out until I read the trivia. In the background of the movie, like, you can predict all this before it happens, because apparently there's a whole bunch of stuff of like characters missing posters and stuff like that, and it's the people who were down here being experimented on, and there is a lot of stuff that just leads into telling you like what's happening before it actually does, but only if you're paying really, really good attention. Yeah,
it's just Easter eggs that might be fun to catch on the a second viewing when you already kind of know where it's going,
right?
Which is cool. But yeah, we have this kind of oddly upbeat montage playing of seeing all this stuff, and then eventually they find the clone like containment like warehouse where it's just all these big like test tubes with clones in them, and Boyega finds more of him, and Jamie Foxx surprisingly finds himself as well, and he's kind of freaked out by it, and it's like a whole thing.
Yeah, they do specifically mention here that not everyone in the town is cloned, but there are certain people who have a lot of clones.
Yes, there's like backups for a lot of Fontaines and so on. So it's like, okay, that's kind of weird. And basically they have to skedaddle because Fontaine freaks out when he sees his clone and shoots at the glass a bunch of times out of anger. And I'm like, hey, those gunshots are probably not going to, keep you stealthy.
I'm kind of like, in order to do this whole thing where they see the clones, they have to like tap on the little pads and clear out some mist to let you see who's inside. And I'm like, I feel like that should raise an alarm, is someone's in the cloning facility just clearing out people. But then double up on that, I'm surprised at the moment the gunshots go off, it's not, oh, hey, gunshots, let's raise the alarm. Like, it takes a good 30 seconds to a minute before anything even happens.
I guess they're arrogant. They don't think anyone would come down here. Like, no one could find this place. No one could sneak in.
All those people upstairs, they're not intelligent enough to get down into our white person room.
Pretty much, yeah. That's just the arrogance we're dealing with here. So, when they get back up, they end up popping back, because we see like a map at one point where like, okay, there's a bunch of places in the town that have these entrances to the lab. So they went in, obviously, the church entrance, but when they come up an elevator, they come out in the nightclub entrance. And like basically the guy running the DJ's like told via his comms, hey, those three are like, we need to apprehend them, like stop them. So he starts playing some of the music they've got to control all the dancers in the club.
This is the best recurring joke I think is in the whole movie, is that there's this artist named Ruckus who is just the music produced by this facility, and all of the lyrics are literally just saying like, I own you, you will listen to me, you are under control, like you will do as I ask. All of the lyrics are just saying that, but it's to like this upbeat tempo, and you barely are even listening to the lyrics. You're just kind of enjoying the way the music sounds. So it just glides right past you, and you're like, yeah, all right, so whatever. But then, like you said, they're using this as mind control. So as he's playing this music, everyone in the crowd starts getting hypnotized by it, and they all start like basically becoming easily controllable to the point where it's like, all right, you're all under control, go get those guys.
Yeah, they basically get chased by a mob when they try to drive away in a car, and it doesn't go very well. I mean, yeah, I think up until this point in the movie, like, I'm like, okay, this last like half hour, 40 minutes has been super interesting with like all the things it's revealed. The three characters have been really enjoyable watching together. But we're kind of setting this thing up here where it's starting to reveal what maybe the final goal of the movie is. Like, at first it was like, okay, what the hell happened to Fontaine? But I think it's Yo-Yo again who repeatedly says quite quickly, they're doing this to the whole town. Like, they're coming in and controlling everyone. We have to do something about this. And at this point, I was like, yeah, you know what? I really feel like a strong sense of like what the Act 3 of this should be now. Is like, it's going to be the heroic mission to somehow stop this, however they may be. And it's maybe the one fault, other than just maybe the final 20 minutes not being amazing, is just the pacing of this, where it almost kind of resets after this next like confrontation, where like Fontaine goes back into his routine before he's able to like sort of find the inspiration to get on board with doing something. And I kind of get it to an extent of like wanting him to have the, you know, the refusal, the dark night of the soul kind of moment. But I do almost think from a momentum perspective, I think it might have been neater to just sort of like roll into it a bit quicker.
Yeah. I think that I enjoy this moment, especially because Fontaine coming to terms with the fact that he is a clone at this point. This moment needed to happen. But looking at everything else that happens afterwards, this moment should have happened a little closer to the end. Yeah. I think putting it right here is just kind of... It works narratively. You would have to restructure a bunch of stuff to like put it to the end. But having half the movie after this moment kind of just feels like the wrong place to have it.
Yeah, because what happens here is they get stopped and a car pulls up and out walks another Fontaine. But this one is dressed smartly. He's got a suit on and he's sort of acting all stern. And then out of the back seat of this car walks kind of the guy that's going to represent, or whose name Nixon apparently. I don't even know that. His name Nixon. Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't
that
think it ever
right.
comes up.
But it's Kiefer Sutherland comes out and he's like, hey, I've been called to come in and clean up this mess.
Yeah, I like Fontaine's immediate reactions, like, so you're the guy in charge. And he's like, no, I have bosses, they have bosses, everyone's got bosses. I'm just the mess cleanup guy.
So he comes in, makes it clear that, you know, obviously the fact that he's got his own Fontaine would definitely imply that, okay, this is like a larger scale. The idea that this isn't just like these clones, that there's like they're using other versions of Fontaine just for menial jobs, which in and of itself kind of like feels like it's alluding to slavery, right?
Absolutely.
You know?
This is 100% the quote unquote house slave. This is 100% like the guy who's working with them and is not like someone who is to be trusted by the rest of the community. I do want to point out, he doesn't go by Fontaine because of that. He goes by Chester.
Right, okay.
So he is like a totally different name. But he is so under their control, it doesn't seem like he has any free will of his own here. Yeah,
and Sutherland basically explains that the reason why you're cloned is because part of like keeping this experiment going is if we just cleaned up the neighborhood, if we got all the drug dealers out and we cleaned everything up, then all the big companies would move in. It would become like a more flourishing neighborhood. There would be Starbucks in every corner, and we wouldn't be able to like experiment on this town anymore. Yeah. We have to keep it the way it is so that we can do this without anyone caring.
The line they used was that you guys are the control group. Like, we are trying to build this out to something that is going to be nationwide, but right now we need you guys to stay a crap hole so that way we can keep running these tests. We can't gentrify you until we're ready to gentrify everybody.
And I think that's also one of the things that hits hard for Fontaine, is that it's not just that he's a clone and that his life's kind of a lie, it's that his entire life's purpose is to make the neighborhood shitty. Like, he's actually playing into their system in a way that's very direct that I think, hits hard. Yeah. So that's there. And he explains that, that's why we need you. It's why we need the pimps, right? And it turns out when Boyega tries to fight back here, where he tries to point the gun at him, he just yells out a code word. And all of a sudden, Boyega and Jamie Foxx just freeze up. They can't move.
Yep.
They've built in safety words and brainwashing terms into the clones. And it's like, wait a minute. So Jamie Foxx is also a clone. Who's the original Jamie Foxx? I don't think we ever find out who the original Jamie Foxx is.
Nah. I don't. I mean, I think it's a. I mean, there is. I'm trying to think whether or not it necessarily means he's a clone, or does it mean that he's been affected by part of their brainwashing stuff? You know.
I took it to mean he was a clone, but I mean, you could.
Yeah, I mean, he also has other clones underground. Like, it would make sense that he's a clone, but I don't think that it necessarily means that he isn't the first one.
That's fair. But because it doesn't work on Yo-Yo, though. Yo-Yo pulls out a gun and says, hey, doesn't work on me. But then all Kiefer Sutherland does is say, hey, Fontaine, point your gun at her. And he does. And he can't help it. And she gets scared. And that's when he gets into he's like super demeaning high horse and is like, hey, you're not important enough to be cloned. You're a dime a dozen. There's another whore everywhere that we can replace you with. We don't need to keep cloning you. So it's like, damn. So, super hateable villain? Check. 3 characters I want to root for and rise up against the man? Check. Lots of nice subtext that lines up with a lot of stuff? Check. Everything's swimming right now.
You're halfway through the movie, you fully convinced me to be on board. Where do you go?
It's just that it should be 2/3 through the movie and not halfway. Yep. I think that's my critique here.
yeah.
Because, sure enough, things do seem to just like... Because the options he gives was like, hey, either we shoot you all, or you just look the other way. Just go back to your lives. Don't care. Just go with it. Go with the flow.
This is... Again, to compare it to Cabin in the Woods, spoilers for that, but you should have watched it by now. This is the end of Cabin in the Woods. This is the end where they're like, look, this is going to happen. We're willing to let you live with it. Like, just go do what you got to do. But then, this being halfway point, we then see the fallout of it, which is Boyega goes home, and while Yo-Yo's still super up on taking care of this, he's broken. He is like, I am not who I thought I was. Not only that, my entire purpose is ruining this neighborhood. Like, I'm not going to fight against them. It's just too much.
Yeah, he realized he's been a cog in someone else's system. He's not the free man that he thought he was, that he'd made the choices that he thought he'd made. And then to top it all off... Rather than
spur him on, he's knocked down a peg.
Yeah, and to top it all off, we haven't even mentioned that earlier on, like, it's, we hear a mother that lives with him. He shouts through the door and says, hey, do you want some food? And she says, no, I'm fine. And we don't see her. And it's actually like here at this part of the movie where he realizes that, he's maybe never seen her and says, hey, can I come in? And she says no. And he eventually breaks down the door and there's just a little voice box. It's just a little automated system. She doesn't exist. She never did. And he kind of has this realization that the other big part of his character that he's brought up throughout the movie is that he has this, like, guilt over not guilt, but he had a little brother who was killed by a cop, and that's pain that he carries with him. It's why he's kind of hesitant to be friends with this kid at the start of the movie, but he has like a heart-to-heart with him here around this point, and admits that he reminds him of his little brother and that stuff.
Yeah.
But he has this realization that he technically never had that little brother. It's not his little brother, but he still cares. And I thought that was kind of sweet because I thought, if this is the motivation he has, because one of the big arguing points when Yo-Yo comes to argue with him and say, hey, we should be helping this town, we should do something, and he says, no, I don't want to, piss off, is that she says, no, there are good people in this town, because he says there isn't. Like, it's all just drug dealers and pimps and hoes and people who are broke, and like this is, it's a shithole. Like, there's no one good here to save. And then you have this little boy who comes up to him and starts talking to him about SpongeBob, and you're like, this kid feels like he deserves to be saved. Boyega, maybe it's time to put on the hero pants.
Yeah, if not for you, then for the next generation. And I also, during that part when he's talking to Yo-Yo, I also really like the fact that, yes, he has the problems with the neighborhood. Yes, he has problems with that. But it is also self-identity as well. Like, he literally says, I'm not real. Like, none of this is real. Like, why are we so concerned about saving something that isn't even real here? And then I think the strongest point, though, is that it isn't instant. It's not a thing where, she leaves, he has a breakdown, like wants to talk to the mom and then does that. They show he goes about another day. Like, he does his routine again. He goes down, gets a scratch off card, talks to the guy outside the convenience store. He tries to make this work, but he just cannot. He can't just push it away. Yeah.
So I like, in theory, I think all this sounds fine. It feels like the movie just kind of slows down too much to do it. After the high of like all the standoff stuff with Sutherland.
Honestly, I think this sequence itself would be fine. It's the issue that I think the next sequence right afterwards, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to take them down? That part takes a bit too long. If that were snappier, if that really just got punchy and got right to the action, I think that would have been enough that this is okay to be there. But then again, that would also move it closer to the end of the movie, so kind of doing exactly what we needed to do anyway.
Yeah, because obviously Yo-Yo wants to send a letter explaining everything, and immediately she's taken off the streets by the van. It's like, no, they were watching, they could see what she was doing, and she's kidnapped, and now that you're down here, you're going to be experimented on. We're going to put our hair stuff on you. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And the payoff to that later on, of course, is that they're too dumb to realize that she wears a wig, and that that's not her actual hair.
Again, it's because it's just every single time that they bring up these characters, these scientists, they are doing the whitest shit you could possibly imagine. There is one point when they're walking through the clone containment room, and one of them's like, yeah, I really like boiling chicken. No salt, no spices, no nothing. Really brings out the natural flavor of the chicken. And I'm sitting there, myself being who I am, like, good Lord, man. Stop.
Yeah. Also, that reminds me, we didn't talk about the second time they're going down to the lab in the elevator. Yo-Yo and Slick Charles start singing, and Boyega just stands in the front, just being like, what are these two doing? But it does show how they've kind of bonded already by that point compared to the first elevator ride.
Honestly, that moment felt like, I'm sure it was in some level like character bits, but it almost felt to me like an improv moment. Like that wasn't scripted, and they just kind of like were in between takes and they just started doing it.
So, yeah, I mean, I'll just explain quickly, but the ultimately the plan is that, hey, we have to like fake your death so you get on the inside, and then you can like sort of like open the doors from within, and that's kind of where it goes. And they do a whole thing where it's like, hey, we'll get your rival to shoot you again, but he actually knows why he's shooting you and that he's not to kill you, and they explain all this with basically like they use like prostitutes to pretend that they're having sex with them, but they're passing information.
Such a funny visual scene as well, because it's like nobody's got eyes on the inside of these cars, so they're just like imitating the movements while all the prostitutes are like, so he wants $1,000 in order to do it, but he needs you to know. It's like so funny. Yeah, one's just like the head bobbing up and down as she's talking, the other one's like she's just got her hand moving up and down, but she's not doing anything, she's just sort of mimicking. And it was funny though, because at one point it's like obviously she's getting into the conversation and not paying attention, and I swear her hand is like turned to such an angle that I'm like, I feel like anyone really paying attention would notice that that's not possible what you're doing right now. But again, that's the sort of thing where they're not paying that close attention, because the white scientists down here are just expecting them to act a certain way up there, and so they're not looking that much into it. It's dripping with subtext, and I love it. So the thing for me at this point in the movie that I was really kind of latching onto was kind of the heart of like, once they realize Yo-Yo's been taken, of Slick Charles and Fontaine being like, well, obviously, yeah, the ultimate goal is to save the town, but like the thing we really care about as the audience is that they have to save her, because she's been likable, she's been a part of their team, and especially given how like we started the movie with Fontaine and her kind of at odds and like unhappy with their current working relationship and all that, the idea of like him playing hero and saying, no, we're going to go down there and get Yo-Yo, right? She's going to bounce back. We're going to get her again. I think that's where some of my disappointment came once they actually go down into the lab, because it's like, you know, she gets like saved. Like, one, her wig thing is funny and it makes a lot of sense thematically, but she basically is out of danger very quickly. And then it's just, hey, now we're together and we both have guns. Let's go and like, you know, get all the clones out. Yeah. So that's I think my biggest problem with it is that this third act, okay, we're storming the castle, they come at it with the idea of, we're going to stop what they're doing. And ostensibly they achieve that. But I think that it's so broad of an idea of how are you going to stop them, that I needed there to essentially, if we're continuing with the Star Wars metaphor, I needed the Death Star explosion moment. I needed like a clear thing of, they are no longer operating, because all we got in this is a bunch of hallways, and later on we see the clones have made it out, but there's nothing to say that this facility's actually shut down. You know, there's nothing to say that they have destroyed this place. It feels like this is the sort of thing that whoever is really in charge, 7 rungs up the ladder, can have this place filled back up and repopulated with scientists in like 2 weeks. Yeah, I think for me, it just kind of boils down to like, oh, we're having a shoot off with Kiefer Sutherland. That's what Jamie Foxx and Yo-Yo are doing.
whilst Fontaine splits off. And they try and do a moment where it's like a big deal that he's facing off against himself. He's facing off with the Chester clone of himself.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought, I like the idea of this, but I think he's only been in one scene before this point, so it doesn't feel like as big a deal, I think, as the movie wants to make it feel like it is.
I feel like they needed to do a little bit more in the back half with this running with the idea of being a clone and like the self-identity stuff. And that would make it a little bit more powerful that he is actually fighting against a different version of himself.
Yeah.
But because they're leaning more on the neighborhood identity, the clone thing kind of falls by the wayside.
Yeah, so it doesn't quite have the impact as I would have liked. And I think the other thing that was weird for me, now obviously the whole like code word that controls the clones does come back in one way that's used. I have some problems with this. One, it felt like Keith Sutherland never tried to use it, right? And I get that he's mainly facing off against Yo-Yo and Jamie Foxx is sneaking around and trying not to be seen. But it felt strange that at no point, like especially since how many of these other gang members they've brought in with them are also clones, like couldn't some of them be like turned off effectively by just a couple of words over the mic? So that's one question I had, right? And then the other question though is that Fontaine, and we'll talk about who he's talking to here in a bit, but he uses the code word to stop Chester at one point and then gives Chester an order to shoot who turns out to be kind of the main villain. And I thought, wait, another clone can use this command? That feels weird and just it feels like a lazy thing in the writing just so you can have this moment, but it doesn't really make sense to me that it would work that way.
Yeah, the only justification I have, and it's weak, is that it keeps on coming back to this arrogance that the scientists have. Like, they don't care if you know because there's literally nothing you can do to stop them. Because they just didn't foresee that this sort of situation could ever actually be a thing. But yeah, it does immediately raise the questions of, okay, you left alive people who know this password that's going to be able to control any number of clones. Even if they never got down to the facility, that could cause havoc upstairs. Like, Fontaine walks into a room with some rival gang members, says Olympia Black, boom, immediately he disrupts the entire natural order. And he could just keep doing that over and over again. Yeah,
if anything, if you have to like excuse a kind of a plot hole, as it were, for the movie, is Kiefer Sutherland basically says it out loud when he's like in the shootout with the other characters at the end. It says, I should have killed you the first time. And when I stopped and thought about it, I went, yeah, you really should have when you look at it from your perspective, because them knowing these code words is kind of a big deal. And even just the fact that, like, so someone killed one of your clones up top. The fact that other people know that he's dead and then are going to see that he's alive, that's going to cause disruptions. It's why this entire plot went into motion in the first place. Surely, if anything, you should have made out your way to also kill the Jamie Foxx that was up there, just because he was a witness and that he has to also be refreshed as a clone. And whoever killed Fontaine should also be refreshed, assuming he is a clone. Maybe he isn't, but assuming he is, they should all be refreshed because they all have to go back in with a blank slate of like, we're all alive and no one will suspect anything. The fact that some people know he died and then he shows up alive is already kind of a weird inconsistency that might make the whole system crumble, which is effectively what happens, and that's the whole plot of the movie.
Yeah. So I mean, that's just a flawed premise at that point, and it's just something you gotta excuse. And I think that it is such a minor, really plot point. It's you just get past the point, because it's not like the characters just ignore it. It's not like they're like, oh yeah, he's up and walking around again, we're just gonna accept that happened. They have problems with it. They bring up that it is an issue. It's only when you look at it through the lens of this shadowy conglomerate that it raises questions, but we can't understand all of their motivations anyway. So theoretically, there is something that would have made that make sense. But it just wasn't presented to us.
That doesn't bother me too much anyway. Like I say, it's kind of like it's a bit of a plot hole that maybe they shouldn't have drawn attention to, but it does make you go, yeah, they probably should have just killed them when they had the chance. It feels a bit, but so many action movies especially have that problem where the bad guy should have just killed the good guy when they had the chance, and the rest of the movie would have not happened and the bad guy would have won. So many movies have that problem. It's kind of easy to just kind of like overlook that, because so much of what's going on throughout most of the movie is so entertaining and you're kind of rooting for the characters at a certain point that you don't really give that much of a shit.
I mean, plus, if you really look at it, the way the conspiracy, the underground facility operates, like, they're very bad at what they do. they're very bad at staying secret. Like,
that's
yes,
fair.
they're doing all this cloning and stuff like that and mind control, but like in terms of being a secret place, they're awful at that.
I mean, how many times though have people found out and they've had to like kill them and reclone them to like? We don't know how long this has been going on. This could have been like how many Fontaines have they went through by the time we get the one at the start of the movie? Who knows?
Yeah, maybe that's the reason they let this one like live and gave him the second chance. Was like, look, we saw 2 clones down there. That's the last 2 we got for like 6 months. We're not running through these any faster.
So the big sort of ending, which it's probably the most disappointing part of the movie to me, is Fontaine finding the head like bioengineer of all this, and it turns out to be himself, but older. This is the original. This is the older man version of Boyega. And it's not exactly like this, but it's very The Architect and The Matrix Reloaded kind of thing.
I was thinking end of Loki, season 1. I don't know if you made it there.
Sure. Yeah, no, I got there.
One above all.
Yeah, I got there. And he basically explains a few things. One, that there was a real little brother. He intentionally gave all the clones that memory because he wanted them to have that, but left out some of the other parts, like the fact that at the morgue they hadn't even bothered to like clean him up with the blood, so he did that. And he, the fact that he didn't get killed instantly. He could have been saved, but he was laying there on his own for 15 minutes until he died, and just stuff that makes it even more horrific and really sort of like puts all this in. But he basically says that his motivations for all this is that he realized that as much as we can all want the same thing, like everyone in the country can want the same thing, fundamentally that's not enough. We have to all be the same. So effectively, over generations, the plan here is to slowly transition everyone to be the same race. And to all have blonde
not
hair,
even just
blue
like
eyes.
the same race, like just everyone thinking the same, everyone doing the same. Like it's all of them have to essentially be clones of each other.
And obviously, there's a lot of obvious subtext here that works both from the perspective of the gentrification of the racial disharmony, but even just in a broader sense of like the system wanting us to all not have our own minds, like all be the same and be acting like each other. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with any of this, like, science fiction wise or conceptually. I don't have a problem with what he's saying here necessarily. I just almost didn't think that the movie needed that, like, because it already worked before when it was just the idea of we're controlling the population of the town and we're going to keep the entire country docile, but having them all just be happy consumers and just be happy because the chicken makes them feel good, because the hair products keep them docile, and so on and so on. This extra layer of we are changing everyone's race over generations, I just felt like you didn't need it. I think the message was already like so potent that this just felt like a step too far into absurdity almost.
Yeah, everything else up to this point seems to be playing on the idea more so of subjugation and control, and the idea that just in this last bit you're going to transition it over to subtle eradication instead. Just feels like I get where it's coming from in terms of social cues. I get where it's coming from of that, like, if you keep climbing that ladder of like racism and stuff like that, that's where you end up at. So I get it, but at the same point, it thematically doesn't feel like it was ever really leaned into. If it were, I would say that, every subsequent clone version of Fontaine would just be slightly more white. Slightly more of where they're altering his mind state to not be Fontaine again, but to be more of what they want him to be. That would lean more into this ending. But instead, the idea that the entire neighborhood is being guided down this path where they are easier to control, that's a much more interesting topic to me than this idea of, we're just going to slowly move away from individuality to this groupthink.
It just went one step too far for me, where like everything already works so well, it didn't need that extra layer, so it felt kind of tacked on. In the same way that final sequence after the title card at the end felt tacked on. I'm like, this is just one bit too many. You should have known when to just stop. Like, all I needed from the third act of this is to really care, make it feel like they were doing something heroic, saving the people of the town, felt like they'd come together as a community, and also save Yo-Yo along the way as well, of course. That's all I really needed from this, because all the themes were already there, all the subtext was already there. This just felt like we went one step into just like, this was already a movie with mad science. That's what the entire concept. Cloning is mad science, but once you got to this part, it just kind of felt like, okay, we've went into absurd mad science to the point where, because this isn't what the rest of the movie was doing, it feels like, because I never really read like, oh, this like lighter skinned guy has a bit of an afro early on, is like, oh, that's a major sign of, you know,
right.
I thought it was just Jamie Foxx reacting to how this guy looked, and it was kind of quirky for the sake of a couple of funny lines.
I mean, all of the guys who are quote unquote like up top, but still work for the facility, they all have that. And so I thought it was just a way of pointing it out, and therefore we have a visual cue of this guy's a bad guy.
Yeah, just a step too far for me. So I lost a little bit of interest for that. So this entire final confrontation, and like I said, the final part where he makes Chester shoot his older self with the code word felt a little bit like, okay, you set this up, but I don't really believe why the clones would be able to do this to the other clones.
Right. Yeah, it shouldn't be a thing where it's like, oh, you just say the words and then they listen to you. It's they say the words and then they listen to their superiors, or the superiors say the words and then it works for them, or something like that. One thing they did do in this scene that was hinted at enough that I think could have been a good subplot if they just hammered on it a little bit more, is the idea of your memory is what makes you, or that your memory like can define you in some way. Because they specifically, as you said, leave the part where he remembers his brother dying, but then this older version of him was like, I spared you the memory of going to the morgue, finding his body, and having to clean the blood off of it. And it feels like that memory would be the defining trait of him saying that we got to go down this path in order to like eradicate this sort of violence, or just this general animosity towards the world that Fontaine's in the current setting seems to have. I like that idea that the memories shape what you become, but the only time I feel like we ever really played on that is at the very beginning when he wakes up and he's missing a day. And then like he has to come about of like realizing that he's missing a day. If we were to expand on that slightly, I think that could have been a really interesting subplot there.
Yeah, no, this assumes we're still having this scene with the older real version of him and all that, but I do also think maybe a better solution for me, at least for the Chester part, is that Chester chooses to rebel against his boss because he hears Fontaine like speak out and why free will is important, and you know what he's doing is wrong, and that he's taking away everyone's identity and culture, whatever else. Like maybe have Chester have a moment of like self, you know, awareness and sort of act. Assuming that's possible. I mean, nothing tells me that he's not just a clone that's being used in this role and has accepted it, but isn't able. Like if you tell me, oh no, he's like a different type of clone who's completely just a zombie who just does whatever he's told. Okay, fine. If you told me that, fair enough. But I don't think they did quite tell me that.
Yeah, they didn't flesh out Chester like at all. We get a name. Yeah. We know that he is a version of Fontaine that's apparently good at fighting, but that's all we got.
So that could have been a big moment if they wanted to play that, is the idea that like Fontaine inspires this other person to want to do the right thing, kind of thing. But I feel bad for kind of ragging on the ending a bit, because like it is better than I was expecting overall. It really is. Like I was really entertained by the characters throughout and like rooting for their success. Like I really they got me engrossed in it and made me want to like take down the bad guys, you know. So
by the way, just to wrap up the plot with the Keith Sutherland bit, is that he ends up pinning down Slick Charles to the ground, and we see that Yo-Yo's like saying like, oh, but he's such a good guy, and starts listing off all his positive traits. But then it turns out that on the ground was actually one of the clones that was just dressed up in his outfit, and the real one comes around and shoots Keith Sutherland, ending it all. So a little bit of like a moment for them where Yo-Yo seems to reveal her actual positive feelings towards Slick Charles, but then she comes back and just like, nah, I was just lying. That was all acting. Don't take that personally.
But it may have been true. You have to read into it. Yeah, the movie basically ends with like news reports of like, hey, all these naked clones are all walking around and we don't know what to make of that. And our main characters are basically agreeing that they might all move to somewhere better.
Memphis.
They don't have to stay in this town anymore. Memphis wouldn't be my first choice, but fair enough, you know. You do what you gotta do.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in Memphis.
So the extra scene though, right? Which one is just a bit too long, because it does the thing where it's like, hey, here's another Fontaine, but he's in LA. but he's got the same routine. He's driving the car, he's doing the weights, he's buying the scratch card. It's just in LA.
It takes you a second as well, because like everything else is perfectly the same. He knocks on the other side of the hall for his mom's door than the one before, and they show him outside getting the scratch off, but it's a slightly different store, but it still has like a homeless guy outside. So it's a very similar routine. It takes you just a second to figure it out.
Yeah, and I was kind of expecting, they're making a deal out of this. I assume there's going to be some like other twist here to this, and there really isn't. It's just there's another clone. They're doing this as well in some part of LA.
Well, the bit of it is that the news report.
Oh yeah, I was getting to that. I'm saying they don't actually reveal anything interesting. There's no new information here.
Oh yeah.
There's no extra thing. Yeah, basically they're just like, he's watching the news report with his friends about what's going on in this town with these clones, and then of course eventually the camera looks over at one of him, and his friends all look around, and then the final line is, they clone Tyrone, and then it goes
it's like, Tyrone, ain't that you?
And it's like, okay, I didn't really need that. Like, I get that obviously because they named the movie They Cloned Tyrone, like they kind of need to like point out why, because the name Tyrone hadn't come up yet. But it really, I just didn't feel like I needed this sequence. It's like,
yeah, I mean, you could have easily told me that Fontaine is just his last name.
Yes, yeah.
And that his first name's Tyrone.
That's what I was assuming the whole movie. I assumed his name was Tyrone Fontaine.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
But again, this sequence serves the purpose of, they said earlier on, this organization is bigger than you could possibly know. It's not just their neighborhood.
Yeah, but you don't need to see that, though.
You don't need to see that. I think it is, like you said, with the ending, one step too far. It takes that just one step. But I can see the concept where it is this idea of, yes, that neighborhood is free. Yes, they're fixed up. But this isn't something that is just localized to one neighborhood. Looking at it for subtext-wise, it is this idea that, like, no, the problem with this gentrification, this racism stuff is nationwide. It's not just like, oh, you fix it in one small spot and it all crumbles. It is this larger idea that's going to take a lot bigger problem solving to fix.
I'll tell you this, though, if they'd shortened it significantly, it would bother me less. See if it just started with them already sitting watching TV and just have that last 30 seconds, perfectly fine. But no, they had to do the wake up, the weightlifting, the riding in the car. They had to show the whole like Groundhog Day routine again. And I'm like, you don't need to show me all this. Like, I get it. He's another one. Like, it's
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I think you refocus a little bit of the third act. You trim down the stuff that I think goes too far, and like, because there's stuff in there I really like. Like, there's moments where you see some of the gang members like sort of like helping out the victims who have been like experimented on out of the cells, and I'm like, yeah, that's a really good, like, do more of that. Like, show me more of this, like them saving the people. Like, give me more of the heroics of it, because
that fits in again with the subtext idea. The neighborhood comes together and fights off this gentrifying force, and they do it by working together and helping each other up rather than tearing each other down. Yeah,
for sure. So the movie's pretty good. It's pretty damn good, actually, for the most part. It's just the third act that doesn't quite excel it up to like, oh, amazing, like it stuck the landing completely. It kind of just has a safe landing at the end, and the safe landing makes the rest of it not any worse, but just not reaching the potential that I felt like it might have been clawing at as it was getting there.
It's a hell of a lot better than Space Jam 2, though.
Oh, it's definitely a hell of a lot better than Space Jam 2. There's definitely no denying that. That's fair. So, all right. Well, I think we're ready to start answering some of these questions at the end here.
Oh, boy.
David, what was your scene of the movie?
God, that actually is a bit hard to think about. I think that there are so many moments in this where it's bouncing between humor that is just landing constantly for me. The characterization is just working throughout. If I really had to narrow it down of just a scene that I think is excellent compared to a scene that I think is just funny as hell, the funny as hell moment is the moment where Jamie Foxx is looking around the chicken place and just chicken dangling out of his mouth as he realizes, like, wait a minute, it's in the chicken, oh God. Like, I think that's possibly one of the best character moments for Jamie Foxx there. And then in terms of just a solidly done scene is the one we mentioned before of the shootout at the motel, where it's just that single camera shot watching John Boyega hyping himself up.
I feel like calling it a shootout is actually a little bit disingenuous. One man gets shot.
He fires shots at them as well. He just doesn't land any. If I had to pick, I think I'm going to give it to the shootout scene. I think that stylistically, it gets me engrossed. It's the thing that like really intrigues me for what comes next. It gets me more into it. Because again, I said those first 15 minutes or so, they're good, but I wasn't sure if it was a movie I was really going to vibe with. That's what turned me. That sequence is what got me being like, okay, I'm in. This is super interesting. And they clearly have very talented people behind the camera to like get this whole sequence working the way it did. So I'll give it to that.
Yeah, it'd be very tempting to give it to that too. I think what I'm going to go with though is when they go down into the lab for the first time and both Yo-Yo and Slick Charles just start messing into the stuff and touching it. Just because I think that's the moment. As much as I really like that scene in the car with the shooting and all that, I think this was the moment where I sort of really clicked with the movie and kind of got, because I think it's once these three are working together and the way they're sort of mixing together. And that chemistry kind of like starting to fire off is, because it's my favorite thing in the movie probably. This is the first scene where it really started to come together, where we really started to feel it and realize that that's what it was going to be. And I think that kind of feeling was like, oh, okay, I think I'm into this. Like I think I'm actually into this movie now. And that was nice to see. So cool. All right, MVP of the movie.
I have no goddamn idea. This cast is strong.
Yeah, there's absolutely an argument for any of the three leads, first of all. And I mean, you could even maybe go further beyond that, but I think one of them is probably the answer.
Yeah. I Kiefer Sutherland, he does an okay job, but ultimately he is just a hateable villain. I mean, I kind of want to say John Boyega just because he is having to play the gambit. He does have, different versions of himself that he's playing, and I think he does a fantastic job as the old version of himself, even if it is not the best part of the movie. He does a great job of portraying this like weary version of himself in the future. But Slick Charles is so much fun. God, I think in my heart of hearts, I gotta give it to Jamie Foxx's Slick Charles, just because, like you said, he's the Han Solo of the movie, but he's infinitely more like fun and just crazy off the wall. It feels like if you had to label a character as the wild card, it's going to be him. While John Boyega is a more interesting character because he's the one who's cloned, ultimately he is very stoic and silent, and while that works in a lot of ways, it doesn't really make it a entertaining character. And then Yo-Yo also fleshed out. She is probably my second place, but I think I just had a lot more fun with Jamie Foxx doing his thing here.
Did you almost say Ray Charles?
I for some reason YouTube Shorts has been giving me all of that movie Ray, starring Jamie Foxx. Like, yeah, I don't know why.
I got the connection because he played Ray Charles, but I just it was a
it has been mistake. Coming up like every 5 swipes. It's like, here's another clip from Ray, and I'm like, why? I'll watch it, but why?
Yeah, I think I do kind of agree that Fontaine's probably in third place, and it's not because the other two are more fun, which is probably the initial reason. I think if they really nailed that ending to his character arc, he might be there to win it, because I'd be so invested in his ultimate realization and his own self-worth, regardless of the fact that he's technically the 17th clone or whatever he is.
Right.
That could be quite touching and special, but because it doesn't quite completely stick that for me at the end, it is between the other two, because they're fun, they're entertaining, funny, and that goes for both of them. I think Jamie Foxx probably has more laugh-out-loud line deliveries, for sure, of the two. But I think Yo-Yo might be more the heart of the movie, because she's the one who just wants to do the right thing from earlier on. She's got a very kind of, almost childlike, idealistic kind of view of the world, despite the shitty situation she's ended up in her current, way of life. Her idealism of the Nancy Drew stuff, of what he solved the mystery. I think I'm going to lean towards her. In terms of, her purpose in the movie and making me care about what's going on, I think she actually might be slightly more important. That said, though, the other two being roped in and ultimately been wanting to do the right thing because of her influence. Like, their turn is also a part of what makes it feel special, because they do change. But I'll go Yo-Yo. I'll leak it out to Yo-Yo. So,
okay.
Cool. All right. What are you rating?
So, because this movie actually feels like it is funny, it is smart, and most importantly, what it's trying to say through its subtext actually feels like it is saying it, rather than it just being like this empty, hollow, like, I say the words, but like, this feels like it hits. It feels like somebody who has went through it and actually like knows the experience here. I think this one is going to eke out a pretty high 8.5 for me. I think that this is one that if you told me John Boyega is going to be an actor that like I deeply enjoy in a role, I'm not sure I would have believed you before this movie, because I haven't seen him in anything that I deeply enjoyed. But this one, like, if he's able to deliver this sort of acting throughout, I'm down for it. Jamie Foxx, obviously always good. And then, just, again, we said it at the beginning, didn't really say anything in between. The style of it, like the visual flair that really just puts you back into the blaxploitation films, but like in a new and interesting way. I would love to see more of this style from this director. Obviously not the exact same like universe, but just hitting on these same sort of cultural vibes. It's got a lot going for it.
Yeah. I think 8.5 is a bit rich for my blood on this. Okay. I think my more lukewarm reaction to the ending, where it's fine but doesn't elevate it in the way I was hoping it would based on everything else, I think that puts it under great for me. I think it quite misses that mark. So I think for me, I'm going at a 7.5, which is to say, I think it's good. I think it's even very good. I just don't think it quite hits great because the ending just falls a bit short, and it goes just one step too far in a couple of ways. But
no, that's fair.
Yeah, the characters are entertaining. The IDs are cool. It's kind of interesting to have that blaxploitation feel, but with this type of science fiction story. It's an interesting mix. You could argue that blaxploitation meets They Live is kind of the core idea of what this is, and then go from there. But it's not aliens, of course. Here, it's just shitty white people, and that, you know,
that's like 90% of the world's problems.
It makes sense. You can't fault it. So, yeah, there you go. That's They Cloned Tyrone, and next time on the show, we will be looking back to the past for one last trip to the future, and that is Back to the Future Part 3. We're rounding out the trilogy next time on the Atomic Cinema Experiment, so look forward to that. And of course, if you haven't been keeping up with Collector's Cut, the other show that we do, we just wrapped up this week Airport season.
Yes.
Which is not a general set of movies just all set in an airport. No, it's the Airport franchise from the 70s, the disaster movie franchise. The first one, in fact, inspired the Airplane spoof. So if that's of interest, you can check out that. And we're about to start Bruce Lee season on that coming up soon. So if that sounds like fun, we got 5 weeks of Bruce Lee movies. Then go over and check that out over in Collector's Cut. There's also Screams After Midnight, the horror movie podcast. And of course, you can get bonus shows over in Patreon if you want to support all this stuff and help keep it coming. You get 2 bonus monthly shows from me and David on Patreon. One is the Criterion Cut, where we review movies from the Criterion Collection, and then the other is Extra Reels, where we review some of the worst shit ever made. And we got our first Uwe Boll movie just on the horizon here,
around the corner.
Great. Yeah, we have done Neil Breen. We've done some famous bad movies that are hilariously entertaining. We've done some really bad dreck that is torturous to sit through, but all of it in the aim of being well versed in shit cinema.
Look, if you had asked me a year ago, is it worth paying money to watch? I'd say no, of course not. But I feel like we've hit our stride. I think the backlog speaks for itself now.
I think it was worth it a year ago, frankly, but it's fine. Yeah. The back catalogue's only growing bigger as time goes on.
You get it all.
So you could check out that. But that is the show, everyone. That's been the Atomic Series. Except, of course, don't worry. I've not forgotten.
Yes, you did. Don't lie to me.
Okay, I did for like a second, and then I remembered. David's got homework.
Wow.
David watched the sci-fi movie that was on the show before he joined it, so we'll find out what that is right now. David, what did you watch?
Yes. As I have said in multiple other episodes, we've got a Jurassic Park movie coming out, and I'm also trying to get to the Jurassic World movies by the time that we do our top of the decade so far list. So Jurassic Park 3, the one where they thought, do we really need to do practical? And the answer is yes. You were not at the point of CGI yet, but God bless you, you tried.
There's still some practical in GP3.
There are, but it is nowhere near the same amount. And there are whole sequences that would not be possible with practical that they put into CG, and it shows. There's a lot that shows in this that just doesn't hold up to the other two.
That's fine. However, it's better than 2, and I'm going to die in that hell.
I think it's better than 2 in terms of pacing. I think that I got more easily bored with 2 for significantly more of the movie. But I do think that in terms of the characters in this and like the general plot, it's on par with 2, because I'm just so uninterested in this family going to rescue their son from a dinosaur. Like, it is so bland and uninteresting.
I mean, that is fair. I think it being a tight 90 minutes where there's just some dinosaur action goes a long way. Now, it's not a great movie by any means. It is B-movie schlock, but
yes,
to be honest, what do I want from a Jurassic Park sequel, really? Because, yes, obviously you can dream big. You can say, oh, something that matches the original, but really, do we ever expect that ever to actually happen? The most we can probably hope for is a good B-movie.
In fairness, I have never seen... I have on and off seen the first 3 Jurassic Park movies. I have never seen any of the World movies.
Oh,
so I do kind of have that hope for the first Jurassic World.
Well, we'll see if you feel that way.
Yeah. But no, in regards to this, like I said, special effects are a little bit dodgy. In terms of the general plot, you're right. It is a very, very brisk 90 minutes. It's easy to get through. But I do think that's kind of also a damning point where I was kind of still just like, all right, did we really need some of this stuff, even when it's only 90 minutes long?
Yeah, so but there's some good silly shit, like A Dream of a Talking Velociraptor, and the loudest ringtone in movie history.
That's
because
true.
You can hear it despite the fact that it's inside the stomach of the Spinosaurus.
There's so many things in this movie that I'm like, okay, so I guess I can accept that based off the plot. And then they immediately hit me with, okay, but I can't possibly be expected to accept that. That's just crazy. And I'm going to go ahead and lean into the fact that this random ass dude who we find out, spoilers for the movie, works at a bathroom tiling company in Oklahoma, is somehow able to bluff his way into saying, yes, I can pay millions of dollars for your paleontological experiment, and you will never look into my credentials at all.
Yeah, it's stupid. Like, no, it's a silly movie, but that's on that level, I think it works somewhat as a silly B movie. I'm not saying it completely works, but it somewhat works.
I think that too much of the movie relies on me caring about this family, and because I gave absolutely no shits about them, it kind of just fell flat for me by the end. But you're right, what little bits of action scenes they have, it works for a B movie standpoint.
Yeah.
Overall, rating wise, I think I'm probably going to end up giving this one. I'm gonna say 6. I'm gonna put it just slightly over my 5.5 that I gave for 2, but that's not saying much. It's still just a 6.
That's fine. 6 seems fairly reasonable to me. I wouldn't expect you to go much higher than that.
Yeah, I mean that's what you gave it. So
yeah,
fair enough.
Just because I'm defending it a little bit, don't think I'm unreasonable here.
Oh yeah. I'm waiting for the review where like I'm going to be defending everything in a movie, and then at the end of it I'm going to be like, yeah, but it was like a 4.5.
It sounds like the sort of stupid thing you would do.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's the topic. So experiment, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Let us know what you thought of the movie in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Get us on. You can join the Discord, I guess. I was going to say social medias, but honestly, most of the social medias have went down the toilet.
I'm trying to figure out Blue Sky. I'm following Pete and Tim, and that's it.
But this guy's alright, but like all the other ones, like all these stupid like Facebook policy changes, and then Musk with Twitter, like they're all just a big cesspool of shite at this point. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Keep watching Science Fiction and Computer at Salsa.